Christmas was supposed to be chill, right? I mean, at least a little quiet. Lights twinkling, some fake snow dusting the balcony, mom humming in the kitchen, dad acting like he actually gives a damn about my cousins. But nope. This year was already off the rails before the turkey even hit the table. I walked into that dining room, heels clicking against the marble floors, the chandelier reflecting off Mom's pearls like she was some kind of queen of fakery, and I could feel it. Something was off. Dad was puffed up, chest sticking out like a rooster, the kind of energy that screams, "I'm about to drop a bomb." Cousins were giggling, probably thinking they'd scored some juicy gossip for Instagram, unaware they were about to witness a full-blown parental meltdown. I slid into my chair, trying to look casual, pretending my nerves weren't doing somersaults in my stomach. Mom shot me this tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I could tell she'd already rehearsed the story she was about to serve. Turkey was carved, mashed potatoes piled like tiny mountains, and gravy glistening like some glossy magazine spread. But I swear I could barely taste it because the tension was a tangible thing, a living, breathing monster sitting at our table. And then Dad leaned in, voice louder than it should have been for such a cozy family scene, and dropped the line that would haunt me forever. "You know, we've been planning this for years, and it's finally time you all knew." My stomach twisted because I already knew where this was going. Mom's eyes sparkled not with joy, but with that sickening gleam of control, like she was about to drop a narrative that would make everyone gasp in awe or horror, whichever suited her. And gasp we did. Apparently, I had inherited absolutely nothing from the family estate. Not a dime. Not even the antique silver spoons Grandma swore I'd get because I was her favorite granddaughter. According to them, some distant cousin, someone I barely knew, was getting everything because they were more responsible or some horse shit like that. I laughed out loud, the kind of sharp, bitter laugh that slices through polite conversation, and my cousins froze mid-bite, gravy dripping off their forks, because I wasn't supposed to react like that. I mean, who reacts with laughter to Christmas betrayal? Me, apparently. Dad sputtered, trying to correct me. Mom's pearls jangled like a warning bell. I could see the panic behind their eyes, the rehearsed stories cracking under my scrutiny. Wait, hold up. Are you serious? That's the Christmas gift? You're telling everyone I'm getting nothing because I'm irresponsible? I pushed my plate away like it suddenly turned to lava. Mom's lips twitched, some half smile that didn't reach the cold glare in her eyes. "Honey, it's complicated. You know how family matters are," she said, voice syrupy but sharp underneath, the kind of tone that makes your skin crawl. I leaned back, crossing my arms, the table's linen cool against my forearms, and I felt it, the surge of adrenaline that only betrayal from people who claim to love you can give. Everyone else looked uncomfortable, some hiding behind their wine glasses, others sneaking glances at their phones like they were watching a slow-motion train wreck. And I realized, right then, that Christmas wasn't about joy this year. It was about exposure. Mom and Dad had lied, rehearsed some story about why I wasn't entitled to anything, why the world didn't owe me even a shred of the legacy I was promised, and now, in front of the whole family, I had to decide how I was going to react. So I did what any self-respecting person with a flair for drama would do. I let the silence sit like a weight, heavy and suffocating, letting everyone marinate in the tension. My cousin Becky finally broke it with some nervous laugh. "Well, I guess that's surprising." And I shot her a look that could have frozen water, because this wasn't about them. It was about me, and the lies and the fake smiles hiding years of manipulation. Then Mom tried the guilt card, her eyes wide and shimmering. "Sweetie, we just wanted to protect you. It's a lot of money, and we thought you weren't ready." "Not ready?" I cut her off, voice low but venomous. Not ready, Mom? Dad, I've been handling six-figure investments since I was 24. I run my own company. I'm responsible enough to manage my life, my business, and apparently your bullshit lies. The words slipped out before I could even second guess, and the room went silent. My uncle nearly choked on his wine, my aunt froze with a hand hovering over the breadbasket, and Dad's face turned that shade of red that screams, "I've been caught." Mom's hand twitched, pearl bracelet clinking like some sad little bell of defeat. I wanted to stand up, scream, throw a plate, maybe even leave, but I stayed seated, letting the humiliation and the anger stew together. Christmas lights flickered above, and for a moment I almost envied the fake snow on the balcony. It didn't have to care about lies or manipulation or legacy theft. That night, after everyone left, I sat in my room staring at the glittering lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my family's penthouse, mind spinning. My parents had lied, humiliated me, and tried to rewrite the rules of inheritance in front of the people I trusted, or thought I trusted. And I realized I couldn't let it slide. I had to get answers, and maybe more than that, I had to get justice. The next morning, I decided to dig into the numbers myself. After all, I wasn't some naive kid anymore. I was a woman who knew how to track money, follow paper trails, and uncover hidden truths. And truth, it has a way of slapping liars right in the face. I called my bank, made small talk with the manager, testing the waters, dropping subtle hints about family trust funds, joint accounts, hidden transfers. Every call felt like stepping into a minefield. I had to be casual but suspicious, curious but confident. The bank manager, a sharp-eyed man named Reynolds, picked up on my energy immediately. He didn't know my parents personally, but he knew when someone was onto something, and I was. Within days, Reynolds confirmed what I suspected. Large transfers had been made to accounts I didn't recognize, money being shifted around under the guise of family expenses or investment opportunities. Every explanation they had given me, every smile and half lie at that Christmas dinner, it was all fake. They'd been moving my inheritance to someone else while pretending I wasn't capable of handling it. And that's when I knew I had the ammunition to fight back, not in some petty, emotional way, but in a calculated, unstoppable way. I started documenting everything: emails, bank statements, contracts, screenshots of conversations, even small notes my parents thought I hadn't noticed. Every fake smile, every whispered excuse, every manipulative word, they all became proof. Days turned into weeks as I plotted my move, and I could feel the thrill of impending justice coursing through me. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was ready. And then one night, after a particularly tense dinner with them, where Mom tried to smooth things over with wine and forced laughs, I had a moment of clarity. I could play their game, but better. They thought they controlled the narrative. They thought I'd just bow and accept it, but they were wrong. I knew exactly how to turn this around, to expose every single lie, to make sure that when the truth came out, no one would ever doubt my competence, my worth, or my rightful place in that legacy family. I wasn't a child anymore. I was a storm in pearls and high heels, and I wasn't leaving that table without my victory. The first step was meeting Reynolds in person, a quick lunch at a neutral location, just the two of us, him with his crisp suit, me with my innocent but I didn't confront them right away. That was the first mistake they expected me to make, so I didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, I slipped into this quiet, calculated version of myself that scared even me. I smiled more. I laughed at Mom's passive-aggressive jokes. I let Dad lecture me about financial discipline like he hadn't just stabbed me in the back with a butter knife at Christmas dinner. Inside, though, I was spiraling. Not weak, focused. Every interaction became data. Every word they said, every glance they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking, it all started forming a picture. And the picture was ugly. My parents weren't just lying about my inheritance. They were laundering the truth through politeness and tradition, hiding behind the idea that family loyalty meant silence. I wasn't silent anymore. I was observant. I started spending more time in their world, showing up to charity galas, sitting through boring investment lunches, playing the role of the dutiful daughter who had accepted her fate. Mom ate that up. She loved thinking she'd won. Dad got cockier, and cocky people make mistakes. One night, after a long fundraiser at some ridiculous private club where the drinks were overpriced and the smiles were faker than the diamonds, Dad had one too many bourbons. We were riding home in the back of the town car, the city lights streaking past the tinted windows, and he started talking, not directly to me, at me, about legacy, about how some people didn't deserve things just because they were born into them, about how money should go to those who understand loyalty. I nodded, let him rant, and stored every word away. Because loyalty to my parents meant obedience. It meant not asking questions, and I was done being obedient. The next morning, I met Reynolds again, this time not at some neutral lunch spot, but inside the bank's private offices. Polished wood, frosted glass, the kind of place where secrets were currency. He slid a folder across the table, thick, heavy, final. "These are accounts your parents didn't disclose to you," he said quietly. My hands trembled just slightly as I opened it. Offshore accounts, trusts layered inside trusts, money moving in circles so tight it almost looked legitimate. Almost. "In this?" I asked, pointing to a familiar name. Reynolds nodded. "My cousin. The same cousin my parents claimed was more responsible. The same cousin who couldn't balance a checkbook without calling her dad." That's when the anger turned ice cold. They weren't protecting the family assets. They were redirecting them, punishing me for not fitting into whatever twisted mold they designed for their perfect heir. I asked Reynolds the question that had been burning a hole in my chest. "Is it illegal?" He paused. "Not yet," he said, "but it's close, and it's dishonest." Dishonest. That word landed harder than illegal ever could. Because dishonest meant personal. It meant intentional. It meant they knew exactly what they were doing. I left the bank feeling like the ground beneath me had shifted. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about power, control, a lifetime of manipulation finally coming into focus. Growing up, my parents had always framed themselves as benevolent rulers. Everything they gave came with strings. Everything they withheld came with shame. If I questioned them, I was ungrateful. If I succeeded without them, I was arrogant. If I failed, it proved their point. And now, they were rewriting the story of my adulthood, casting me as reckless and undeserving so they could justify stealing from me. I went home and opened my laptop, building a timeline. Dates, transfers, conversations, patterns. It was all there if you looked long enough. The more I dug, the uglier it got. They were payments to people I didn't recognize, hotels, jewelry stores, private flights. And then I saw it, a name that made my stomach drop. A woman, not just any woman, someone I'd seen before, someone Mom had introduced as a friend, someone who laughed too hard at Dad's jokes and touched his arm like it was hers to claim. My chest tightened as the pieces clicked into place. Secret affairs, slush funds. My inheritance wasn't just being rerouted to a responsible cousin. It was financing my parents' private lives, their lies, their betrayals, their double standards. Suddenly, Christmas dinner made sense. The urgency, the public announcement. They needed witnesses. They needed a narrative locked in before I could challenge it. I closed my laptop and sat there in the dark, the city humming outside, feeling something crack open inside me. This wasn't grief. This was resolve. If they wanted to play dirty, fine, I could do that too. I just had to be smarter and quieter. Over the next few weeks, I became a ghost in my own family, present but invisible, listening more than speaking, watching who met with whom, noticing how Mom's phone never left her side anymore, how Dad took calls in the garage, how certain bills were suddenly misplaced. I started planting small seeds, casual comments about audits, about legal reforms, about how banks were cracking down on undisclosed trusts. I watched their reactions like a hawk. Dad laughed it off too quickly. Mom got defensive. That told me everything. One night, Mom cornered me in the kitchen while the housekeeper was out. She poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter like she was about to stage an intervention. "I've noticed you've been distant," she said. I shrugged. "Just busy." She studied me, eyes sharp. "You're not digging, are you?" There it was, the fear. I smiled sweetly. "Digging into what?" She relaxed just a fraction, but not enough. "You know how things work in this family," she said. "Some conversations are better left alone." I met her gaze steady. "Funny," I replied. "I've been thinking the same thing." That night, I emailed Reynolds and asked for copies of everything. Not summaries, originals, metadata, the works. If I was going to burn this down, I was going to do it with facts, hard, undeniable facts. And while I waited, I started preparing my exit strategy. New accounts, new legal counsel, quiet consultations with an estate attorney who specialized in family disputes. I didn't tell him everything at first, just enough. His raised eyebrow told me he'd seen worse. "People get ugly when money's involved," he said. I smiled thinly. "They've been ugly long before the money." The day Reynolds sent the files, I locked myself in my apartment and went through them line by line. I cried once, just once, when I saw a transfer dated the same week I'd been hospitalized years ago, my parents telling me they were handling everything, when in reality they were moving my future into their shadows. After that, the night of my aunt's anniversary dinner arrived, and I could feel the tension coiling like a snake in my stomach, a mixture of adrenaline, excitement, and sheer satisfaction. I wasn't nervous about being seen or judged. I thrived on that. I thrived on knowing my parents had no idea what was coming. I stepped out of my black stiletto heels onto the marble foyer of my aunt's mansion, the lights reflecting off the gold accents like they were shining just for me. The place smelled of fresh roses, expensive candles, and that faint undertone of elitism that only people with too much money and too little conscience can produce. Everyone was there. Cousins in designer dresses, uncles adjusting their cufflinks, Mom floating in with that tight-lipped smile, Dad puffed chest first like he owned the place. I let my eyes scan the room casually, noting small details. The way Dad's gaze flickered to the wine cellar, Mom's wrists subtly trembling as she held her glass, how my cousin Becky kept glancing at me as if sensing a storm before it hit. I smiled sweetly and let them all bask in the illusion that I had no idea, that I was the harmless daughter who had supposedly accepted her lesser share of the inheritance. But inside, I was a predator. I knew every move they'd made, every lie they'd told, every dollar they'd shifted. I knew who would freeze when exposed, who would try to talk their way out of it, and who would crumble completely. Dinner started, silverware clinking, wine glasses tipping in polite toasts. Everyone laughed at Dad's jokes, and Mom gave me a glance so quick it was almost invisible, a little flick of her eyes that screamed, "Play along, don't blow it." But I wasn't playing along. I was observing, I was cataloging, and I was waiting. Halfway through the main course, I made my move. I reached casually for my phone, pretending to text, and slipped an email to Reynolds. He read it and confirmed receipt almost instantly, a little green check appearing in my inbox like a wink from fate. The document package was ready, authenticated, bulletproof. All I had to do was deliver it. I smiled, leaning slightly forward, listening to Dad lecture about stocks like a man who had no idea he was about to be humiliated. "You know," he said, voice booming just enough for everyone to hear, "it's not about how much money you have. It's about wisdom, responsibility, knowing who deserves what." I nodded politely, letting the words sink into my bones, knowing that my counterpunch was loaded and ready. Dessert arrived, chocolate mousse, delicate truffles, and champagne sparkling like liquid diamonds. Mom excused herself to the restroom, leaving Dad and me at the table. That was my window. I slid the folder onto the table quietly, underneath the white linen, careful not to draw attention yet. "Funny thing about responsibility," I said, voice soft, almost conversational. Dad glanced at me, brows raised. "What do you mean?" I smiled, innocently enough that even I almost believed it, and then slowly lifted the corner of the folder, letting a glimpse of the documents show. His eyes flicked down. One glance, that was all it took. Recognition, panic. My stomach tightened, not with nerves, but with the thrill of watching the mighty fall. What is this? His voice cracked, a sound I'd never heard before. Mom returned from— I could feel my parents' control slipping, their carefully crafted images cracking under the undeniable proof. I continued, letting them twist in their own guilt. I could see the tiny, trembling beads of sweat forming at Dad's temples. Mom's mouth opened and closed, searching for words that didn't exist. I took my time, savoring the moment, every bite of victory delicious, like the finest chocolate mousse. When I finished, the room was dead silent except for my voice, calm and even. Christmas was just the start. This is the truth, and it's on record. Someone whispered, "Wow." Another murmured, "I can't believe it." I smiled, letting the silence stretch, heavy, suffocating, and then dropped the final bomb. And I've already arranged for my rightful inheritance to be secured. Every dollar, every account, every asset. All the money that was supposed to be mine is now officially mine. Mom's hands flew to her face. Dad's jaw dropped. Cousins exchanged wide-eyed glances. I leaned back, satisfied, letting the room absorb the full weight of justice. They had always believed that appearances were everything, that no one would look beyond the surface, that they could rewrite reality in the eyes of their social circle. But here I was, exposing every lie, every manipulation, every betrayal, in front of everyone. It was beautiful. And then, just when I thought the night couldn't get more dramatic, I added the final layer, the cherry on top. And for the record, I said, voice rising slightly so the entire room could hear, any further attempts to misrepresent me or my finances will be documented, reported, and legally pursued. I suggest you start practicing honesty. It'll save you a lot of embarrassment. That was the moment when my parents finally collapsed under the weight of their own deception. Mom's shoulders slumped, her pearls jangling softly, a sad echo of her lost composure. Dad buried his face in his hands. Cousins looked at me with awe and a little fear. And me? I felt lighter than I had in years. Not triumphant, not gloating, satisfied, peaceful. I had turned the tables, exposed the lies, and finally, publicly, claimed what was rightfully mine. Dinner ended awkwardly, everyone whispering behind polite smiles, but I didn't care. I had done it. My parents had learned a lesson they'd never forget. Power built on deceit is fragile, and the truth always finds a way to the surface. As I left that mansion that night, city lights reflecting off my leather coat, heels clicking against the sidewalk, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. The days after my aunt's anniversary dinner were a blur of whispers, stares, and carefully veiled panic from my parents. Everywhere I went, I felt the shift in energy like a current running through the air, sharp, electric, undeniable. Their friends, their social circle, even distant relatives, they all treated me differently now. There was awe, curiosity, and just a pinch of fear in the way people looked at me, like they'd seen a predator step out of a cage. I walked into the country club for brunch that Sunday and caught Dad's reflection in the marble walls before I even spotted him. His shoulders slumped, the arrogance stripped away, replaced with a tension I hadn't seen in years. Mom trailed behind him, pearls clinking softly, hands clenched at her sides, lips pressed in a thin line of frustration and shame. I sipped my mimosa, smiling just enough to suggest that nothing fazed me, when in reality, everything felt surreal. The thrill of victory was intoxicating, but it came with a strange weight. The satisfaction of revenge always does. Over the next week, I began subtly tightening the screws. Invitations to social events, casual mentions of the documents, offhand questions like, "Oh, I hope everyone knows how thorough our family finances are," dropped into conversations with friends who weren't part of the inner circle but had influence. Everyone I spoke to knew something had shifted, but no one knew exactly what. That ambiguity worked in my favor because it fed my parents' paranoia. They were constantly second-guessing, walking on eggshells, whispering to each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. And I was paying attention. I thrived on it. One evening after an especially tense week, I invited Reynolds over. Not officially, just under the guise of needing advice about future investments. Dad hovered in the background, pretending to read a newspaper, trying to look casual, but I caught the twitch in his jaw. Mom's eyes flicked to me every few seconds, calculating, suspicious. Reynolds arrived, crisp suit, calm demeanor, and immediately set to work reviewing the finer points of my documents with me. I left the folder open on the dining table, strategically placed so that Dad's wandering eyes caught it without me forcing him to look. He tried not to notice, tried to act absorbed in the sports section, but the glare from the lamplight off the metal clips on the folder betrayed him. Mom hovered nearby, her smile tight, like a shark trying to appear harmless. I let them stew, sipping my wine, feigning casual interest in Reynolds' commentary. You know, I said lightly, it's fascinating how small errors or omissions can lead to massive loopholes. Dad's hand froze mid-page, eyes darting toward me. Mom stiffened, pearls jangling. Errors? She asked, voice slightly strained. I tilted my head innocently. Sure, oversights. Some accounts transferred without the heir knowing. Simple mistakes, really. Their reactions were priceless. Dad swallowed hard, pretending to cough. Mom's lips pressed together, jaw tight. I smiled, letting the silence stretch, filling it with tension and control. That night, after Reynolds left, I retreated to my room to plan the next phase. My parents were fragile now, rattled, uncertain. Their reputation, carefully curated over decades, was vulnerable, and I knew the perfect moment to strike would come at the next big family gathering, my cousin's engagement party. I marked it on my calendar, thinking about the guest list, the setting, and the subtle ways I could manipulate perception. I started preparing statements, legal briefs, and casual anecdotes that would hint at the truth without giving away the full story until the dramatic reveal. Meanwhile, I began monitoring my parents' behavior obsessively. Every phone call, every whispered meeting, every hurried errand became a clue. I realized that the woman Dad had been seeing, my parents were already there, radiant, practiced smiles plastered on, oblivious to the storm approaching. Dad was charming his friends, Mom engaged in animated chatter. I let them enjoy their brief illusion of control while I surveyed the room, identifying allies, potential witnesses, and any weak spots. As the engagement couple exchanged congratulations, I slipped closer to my parents, letting casual comments and pointed glances do the initial work of unsettling them. Then the moment arrived. A toast was called, and I volunteered, raising my glass. Everyone turned, curious, as I spoke. I started light, complimenting the couple, celebrating love, family, and success. Then, ever so smoothly, I shifted the tone. Family, I said, voice steady, eyes locking on Mom and Dad, is built on trust, honesty, and accountability. Without those, what are we really celebrating? Murmurs rippled through the room. I let my gaze linger on them, watching panic flicker across their carefully constructed masks. Then I dropped the bomb. I think it's important to acknowledge that honesty isn't always convenient. Some of us learned that the hard way when trust was broken, documents were hidden, and legacies mismanaged. Guests exchanged puzzled glances. I smiled, sweetly, letting the suspense build. I have all the facts, all the numbers, and all the proof. I've been patient, waiting for the right moments to ensure that everyone understands exactly how certain family matters were handled. Mom's face went pale, her hands gripping her glass like a lifeline. Dad's jaw tightened, eyes darting toward the crowd, desperate to regain control. I continued, calmly, deliberately. It's amazing what careful documentation can reveal. It's amazing how truth, when finally presented, can clear the air and restore what's been stolen. I didn't need to say more. Guests were murmuring, pulling out phones, whispering. Some had already figured out what I was implying. Reynolds, discreetly positioned near the back. The days after the engagement party were intoxicating, not because of champagne or applause, but because of the slow, delicious unraveling of my parents' carefully constructed world. Everywhere I went, I could feel the tremor of their panic radiating from them. Their friends whispered behind them, their colleagues cast sidelong glances, and their social standing, the one thing they thought untouchable, was cracking like fine china. I didn't have to say anything. I didn't have to gloat. The proof, the exposure, the subtle but unmistakable evidence of their deceit had done all the talking. Dad stopped calling me for casual lunch invites. Mom started rehearsing explanations in front of the mirror, practicing her apologies that never came out right. And I watched it all, sipping my morning espresso on my balcony, feeling lighter, sharper, alive. I decided it was time to escalate, to move beyond observation and subtle intimidation. I needed them to feel the consequences fully, personally, and socially. Reynolds and I coordinated a plan that was simple in concept but devastating in effect. A legal and financial audit of all accounts linked to my parents' hidden transfers, timed to coincide with a major family charity gala. That event was their showpiece, the stage they had always loved, and I was about to turn it into the arena of their reckoning. I spent weeks preparing, statements drafted, evidence compiled, witnesses alerted. Every dollar moved, every account hidden, every lavish purchase at the expense of my inheritance was documented meticulously. I became obsessive, calculating every move, memorizing sequences, predicting their reactions. I watched as Mom began second-guessing every decision, Dad's confidence eroding by the hour. Their once impenetrable armor of arrogance was peeling away, layer by layer. On the night of the gala, I arrived early, dressed in an understated but sharp black gown that hinted at elegance and authority without screaming for attention. I could see my parents across the room, sparkling smiles in place, oblivious to the storm I carried with me. I positioned myself strategically near key guests, whispering casual remarks about family accounts, errors that needed addressing, and the importance of financial transparency, letting seeds of doubt spread without exposing my full hand. I noticed Dad's gaze flicker toward me, a twitch of recognition that I savored. Mom's hand clenched around her champagne glass, pearl bracelet clicking softly, an audible tick of anxiety I had planted perfectly. Then the first toast of the evening was called, and I seized the moment. I raised my glass with a smile, calm, controlled, letting the room's chatter dim as eyes fell on me. Family is a complicated thing, I said, voice steady, carrying enough weight to command attention. It can be beautiful, nurturing, and supportive, or it can be a web of secrets and manipulation. The murmurs grew louder. I let them. I let them squirm. Some of us learn lessons the hard way, I continued, eyes locking on Mom and Dad. Some of us discover truths in the most uncomfortable ways, truths hidden behind polite smiles and rehearsed conversations. And sometimes the consequences of deceit can be unavoidable. The room went still. The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. I could see Dad's jaw tightening, Mom's lips pressed thin, their social confidence crumbling as the realization settled in. This wasn't subtle anymore. This wasn't casual exposure. This was public, undeniable, and humiliating. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice, letting only a few people close enough catch the next sentence. All accounts, all transfers, all hidden assets have been thoroughly audited, verified, and documented, and I've taken steps to ensure accountability. The reactions were immediate. Gasps, murmurs, phones snapping pictures, whispers spreading like wildfire. The weeks following the gala were intoxicating. My parents were ghosts of themselves, moving through the house like shadows, pretending normalcy while the tension between us burned hotter than ever. Dad stopped smiling around me entirely. Mom's attempts at charm were stiff, robotic, almost sad. They tiptoed through conversations, half expecting me to pounce at any misstep, and honestly, I loved every second of it. But I knew patience was still my ally. this was not yet the climax. The final act required timing, precision, and an audience. That audience would come in the form of the holiday charity auction, a high-profile event where every relative, socialite, and influencer with eyes would be present. It was their playground, their stage, and I was about to turn it into a theater of exposure. I spent days preparing, rehearsing what I would say, ensuring Reynolds had everything lined up, confirming that my legal counsel could corroborate each claim if the situation escalated publicly. I was meticulous, knowing that a single misstep could allow my parents to scramble back control. The night of the auction, the mansion glittered with extravagance. Towering floral arrangements, golden candle holders, and crystal glasses catching the light like 1,000 tiny stars. My parents were there, radiant in their carefully curated attire, smiling like everything was normal. They didn't notice the chill in the air, the way I glided through the room, heels soft against the polished floors, eyes sharp, observing, calculating. I let them believe they still had control, that I was just another guest, until the perfect moment arrived. It was during the live auction, just as the bidding on a rare art piece hit the roof, when I asked to speak. Everyone quieted, curious, a few cameras already capturing my presence. I raised my glass, calm, controlled, a small, almost imperceptible smirk tugging at my lips. Family is everything, I began, voice steady, carrying across the room. It's supposed to be about trust, honesty, and support. But sometimes, even families have secrets. Sometimes, even the people we trust the most manipulate, mislead, and deceive. The room shifted. My parents stiffened. Eyes darted to me, some confused, others intrigued. I let the suspense stretch, feeling the weight of attention settle like a tangible force. I've discovered many such secrets recently. I carefully paced my words. Hidden accounts, transfers to unexpected recipients, manipulations designed to rewrite legacies and determine who deserves what, all while pretending care, affection, and guidance. Gasps spread through the room, whispers, phones clicking. A few of the more perceptive relatives exchanged knowing glances. My parents' faces went pale, pearls jingling on Mom's wrist, Dad's hand tightening around a champagne flute like it could anchor him against the rising tide. "The truth," I said softly, leaning slightly forward so the nearest guests could hear the details, "is that deception has a price, and I've ensured that the price is paid. Accounts have been audited, every transfer verified, and all documents securely in the hands of those who can enforce accountability. It's not speculation, it's fact, and now it's public." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating, the kind of silence that makes you feel like the air itself is holding its breath. My parents tried to recover. Dad opened his mouth, maybe to deny, to charm deny, but the words died on his tongue. Mom's lips trembled, a faint whimper of panic escaping as she realized this was not something anyone could spin or sugarcoat. I continued, letting the truth land, slow, deliberate, surgical. And for anyone curious about the specifics, my bank manager and legal counsel are more than willing to provide confirmation. Every transfer, every hidden asset, every orchestrated lie has been documented, and now justice is in motion. The room erupted, not with applause, but with shock, murmurs, and disbelief. People were whispering, recording, passing the information along in real time. My parents' social armor, built over decades of appearances and influence, shattered before my eyes. I watched Dad's shoulders slump, the fire in his gaze extinguished by the cold weight of accountability. Mom's hands clutched at her pearls, knuckles white, lips pressed so tight I thought they might crack. I felt a wave of satisfaction, a kind of exhilarating justice that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with power, truth, and control. I stepped back, letting the room digest what I had said. There was no turning back. The evidence was public now, the witnesses everywhere, and my parents' credibility evaporating like steam from a pot left too long on heat. After the event, I slipped away to the balcony, the city lights stretching infinitely below me, reflecting in my eyes like shards of victory. Reynolds joined me quietly, handing me a glass of champagne. "You did it," he said softly. "They won't recover from this socially or financially." I smiled faintly, taking a slow sip. "It's not over," I replied. "There's still one more step. Emotional closure. That's the part that really counts." And I knew exactly how it would happen. It wouldn't be in public. It would be intimate, unavoidable, and unassailable in its intensity. My parents had stolen, lied, and manipulated for decades, and they needed to face the consequences fully, not just in reputation, but in the eyes of their child, the one they thought they could control. Over the following days, I orchestrated one-on-one meetings, casual lunch invitations that were anything but casual. I arranged private encounters where the truth could be laid bare, without the buffer of an audience, where their manipulation, excuses would crumble in the glare of undeniable evidence. Mom broke first, tears flowing freely as she tried to justify her choices. Dad's excuses faltered, words sticking in his throat as I recounted every calculated lie, every transfer, every hidden account, every stolen moment of my life. I wasn't shouting, I wasn't crying. I was calm, methodical, utterly in control. And I could see the weight of realization crushing them. By the time the weekend rolled around, the tension in the house was practically a living thing. I could feel it coiling in the hallways, curling around the chandelier, slipping into the corners of every room like smoke. Mom and Dad were on edge, glancing over their shoulders, speaking in hushed tones that they thought I couldn't hear, but I could. Every whispered word was another breadcrumb, another piece of their unraveling psyche laid bare for me to collect and use. I decided it was time for the final act, the confrontation that would leave no room for excuses, apologies, or reinterpretation. They had humiliated me at Christmas, stolen my inheritance, manipulated my life. Now, it was my turn to make them feel the weight of every lie they'd told, every manipulation they'd practiced, every betrayal they'd orchestrated. I invited them over under the pretense of a quiet family dinner, just the three of us, intimate, no audience, no witnesses. They arrived in their polished, perfect forms, Mom's pearls glinting, Dad's hair meticulously styled, and they believed I was still their obedient child, that this was another night to charm me back into complacency. I greeted them warmly, poured wine, made small talk, all while calculating, planning, waiting. They didn't suspect a thing, and that was the sweetest part. Once the first course was served, I slid the folder across the table, placing it so that both of them could see it without me needing to make a scene. Their expressions shifted instantly. Curiosity, confusion, a faint ripple of fear. I smiled, casually, innocently, and then began. "You know, over the years, I've learned a lot about family, about trust, and about consequences. I've also learned that appearances can be deceiving." Their smiles stiffened, eyes narrowing. Dad's hand twitched near his fork. Mom's bracelet jingled softly against her wrist. I let a slow, deliberate pause hang in the air, letting the suspense settle. Then I began to expose everything. The transfers, the accounts, the hidden investments, the way my inheritance had been redirected, the mistress, the lavish purchases, the lies they'd spun in front of family, the rehearsed smiles, the narratives designed to humiliate me publicly. I narrated it slowly, carefully, every word precise, every accusation backed with documentation, every revelation leaving a scratch in their carefully crafted armor. Dad's jaw tightened until I thought it would snap. Mom's lips trembled, her voice shaking as she tried to interject, trying to justify, to explain, to minimize. But I didn't allow it. I let the evidence speak, letting each revelation crash over them like waves, relentless and unstoppable. The room felt smaller, hotter, the air thick with the tension of confrontation. Tears ran down Mom's face as she tried to apologize, voice cracking under the weight of her guilt. Dad's face was red, flushed with embarrassment and rage, unable to find the words to repair the damage, unable to stop the truth from dismantling the facade he had spent a lifetime building. I sat back, calm, collected, the storm inside me finally aligned with the storm I had orchestrated outside. "Do you see now?" I asked softly, letting the silence stretch like a blade. "Do you understand the consequences of what you did? The years of lies, manipulation, and deceit? Do you understand that the child you thought you could control is no longer powerless?" They nodded, weakly, defeated. Mom whispered something incoherent, something about protection, about intentions, but the words were empty, meaningless against the mountain of truth in front of them. I allowed a small, satisfied smile to tug at my lips. The financial justice had already been served, the accounts secured, the transfers reclaimed, but this was emotional, personal justice, the kind that no amount of money could buy and no charm or smile could erase. And then I delivered the final stroke, the piece they hadn't seen coming. "This isn't about revenge anymore," I said, voice steady, eyes locking on theirs. "It's about closure. It's about making sure that you understand exactly what it feels like to lose control, to have your manipulations laid bare, and to recognize the person you underestimated is stronger, smarter, and more prepared than you ever imagined." They remained silent, absorbed in the weight of their failure, in the knowledge that their empire of deceit had crumbled, not through scandal or gossip, but through precise, deliberate exposure. I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. Not triumph in anger, not glee in humiliation, but calm, absolute satisfaction. Justice had been served, and it was clean. Later that evening, as they left my apartment, the city lights reflecting off their retreating forms, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about money, exposure, or even revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my narrative, my identity, and my sense of self-worth. My parents had tried to define me through their lies, through their manipulations, through stolen inheritance and public humiliation. I had rewritten that story. I was no longer the obedient child, the overlooked heir, or the manipulated pawn. I was the orchestrator, the storm, the reckoning. And in that moment, as the night embraced the city and I watched the taillights fade into the distance, I knew the weight on my chest had lifted. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, all of it had transformed into clarity, empowerment, and resolution. Christmas had started with lies, humiliation, and deceit. It had ended with truth, justice, and unshakable control. I finally had the life, the inheritance, and the dignity that had been stolen from me. And as I stood there, alone but triumphant, I knew with absolute certainty that I had not just claimed what was mine, I had become the person I was always meant to be, unstoppable, untouchable, and undeniably in control of my own story. The morning after the confrontation, the city felt different, lighter somehow, as if the skyline itself had exhaled with me. I walked through the quiet streets with a sense of finality I hadn't known in years, heels clicking softly against wet pavement, coffee warming my hands. My parents' world had collapsed under the weight of truth, and there was no rebuilding it without reckoning. They were broken, not just financially, not just socially, but emotionally, and I realized that was where the real justice lay. Over the next few days, I watched the aftermath unfold with a mixture of detachment and satisfaction. Family gatherings became awkward exercises in avoidance. Invitations my parents once wielded like weapons were no longer extended. Mutual friends whispered behind hands, glances sharp, judgment heavy in the air. I moved through it all like a calm observer, no longer trapped in their web, no longer fearful of their manipulation. Reynolds remained a quiet anchor, checking in occasionally, ensuring that every legal and financial piece remained secure. I spent more time reflecting, processing the whirlwind of events, and acknowledging how much I had endured to get here. I allowed myself a few moments of quiet grief, not for revenge, but for the lost time, for the innocence stolen by their lies, for the childhood overshadowed by manipulation. And then I let it go. I refused to let their deceit define my future. One afternoon, I received a call from my cousin Becky. Her voice was hesitant, nervous. I just wanted to say, she began, I had no idea. I didn't know what they were doing. I'm sorry, and I want to help. I listened, carefully, weighing her sincerity, and realized that in exposing my parents, I had also uncovered allies and unexpected support within the family. I decided to let her in, not fully, but enough to feel a sense of realignment, a rebuilding of trust that hadn't existed before. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet victories. I finalized my accounts, ensuring every dollar was secure. Legal agreements were ironclad. Social reputation restored. Every detail documented. And then, finally, I allowed myself a moment of reflection, looking out over the city from my apartment balcony. The wind carried a crisp edge of winter, brushing against my face, and I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Not the fleeting peace of avoidance, but the enduring peace of resolution. My parents would have to live with the consequences of their choices. They would have to face themselves without the illusions, the manipulation, the control they had clung to for so long. And I would live free, empowered, unshackled, and fully in control of my life. I allowed myself a small smile, savoring the victory that had been years in the making. Justice, I realized, was not just about money or revenge. It was about reclaiming agency, asserting truth, and refusing to be silenced. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Closure doesn't come from punishment alone. It comes from taking back what was yours all along, the right to define your life, your narrative, and your destiny. That night, I sent one final email to Reynolds, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey, the storm we had navigated together. It's done, I typed. All accounted for, all resolved. Justice isn't just served, it's lived. His reply came almost instantly. You've done more than anyone could imagine. You're unstoppable. I set my phone down, allowing the quiet of my apartment to envelop me, the city lights glittering like distant stars through the windows. The storm had passed. The lies had been exposed, the deceit had crumbled, and I was finally free. Christmas had started with betrayal, humiliation, and manipulation. It had ended with truth, exposure, and justice. And in between, I had discovered my own strength, resilience, and unshakable power. I knew as I leaned against the balcony railing that nothing could take that from me. I had rewritten my story. I had reclaimed my inheritance, my dignity, and my life. And most importantly, I had reclaimed myself. I turned back into the apartment, feeling the warmth of certainty settle over me like a soft, comforting blanket. My parents would have to live with the consequences of their choices, and I would live with the satisfaction of having endured, outsmarted, and ultimately triumphed. I was not just a survivor of their deceit. I was the architect of justice, the storm that exposed the truth, and the woman who refused to be silenced. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Closure doesn't come from punishment alone. It comes from taking back what was yours all along, the right to define your life, your narrative, and your destiny. That night, I sent one final email to Reynolds, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey, the storm we had navigated together. It's done, I typed. All accounted for, all resolved. Justice isn't just served, it's lived. His reply came almost instantly. You've done more than anyone could imagine. You're unstoppable. I set my phone down, allowing the quiet of my apartment to envelop me, the city lights glittering like distant stars through the windows. The storm had passed. The lies had been exposed, the deceit had crumbled, and I was finally free. Christmas had started with betrayal, humiliation, and manipulation. It had ended with truth, exposure, and justice. And in between, I had discovered my own strength, resilience, and unshakable power. I knew as I leaned against the balcony railing that nothing could take that from me. I had rewritten my story. I had reclaimed my inheritance, my dignity, and my life. And most importantly, I had reclaimed myself. I turned back into the apartment, feeling the warmth of certainty settle over me like a soft, comforting blanket. My parents would have to live with the consequences of their choices, and I would live with the satisfaction of having endured, outsmarted, and ultimately triumphed. I was not just a survivor of their deceit. I was the architect of justice, the storm that exposed the truth, and the woman who refused to be silenced. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Closure doesn't come from punishment alone. It comes from taking back what was yours all along, the right to define your life, your narrative, and your destiny.